This is the 6th unit for the College Board. Alright, so I do things a little bit out of order the way College Board sort of dictates it. And the reason being is I find it easier to explain to you like how Americans function and how our government functions if we go over what our basic rights and freedoms and all that good stuff are first. Alright, because those are essential. Excuse me for a moment. Good morning, Baker. Who? Yes, yeah. And your office is over by 2417? Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. Bye. Officer Torres' room is his office. They're not in trouble. Okay. But, you know where Coach Davis, I don't know where Coach Davis' room is this year. Do you know what was last year from that hallway all the way down, like facing the cafeteria almost?
It's in between that hallway and the hallway that's after that. It's Coach Davis. It's on the.
So, alright, you remember where my room was last year? Okay, basically go toward the cafeteria, and the door will be like facing the cafeteria on that hallway upstairs. Yeah, Officer Torres. I have no idea what he wants, but you're not. He said you're not in trouble, so don't think that you did something wrong. Okay.
You're going to jail.
If you don't know what that was about, don't ask. It doesn't matter. All right. So listen, the very first thing that you need to understand as we talk about this, because we're going to use the term civil rights and civil liberties. Rights and liberties are not the same thing. Okay? A lot of the time, you will misconstrue the two and you will think that they're synonymous. You will think that they are words that you can just sort of interchange, right? Because you have rights and you have liberties and your rights are your liberties. That's not accurate. Okay? Liberties are basic freedoms. Okay? In fact, we know liberty is a synonym for freedom, right? Okay? So if I say that you have freedom of speech, you have freedom of religion, these are liberties. Okay? Rights are different. Okay? Rights are protection against or from discrimination. Okay? Think to any sort of A-push or U.S. history class or anything you've had in that manner, right? We think of the civil rights movement. Okay? The civil rights movement was a subset of our culture, of our population, who were trying to end discriminatory practices, discriminatory treatment against their subset of the population. All right? Civil liberties are protected by the First Amendment, right? Speech, assembly, petition, press, religion. And civil rights are what we consider protected by the Fifth Amendment. And most people don't realize the Fifth Amendment is sort of similar to the First in the fact that the Fifth Amendment has multiple provisions to it, right? You guys all probably know one. Christian, what's it mean to plead the Fifth?
It means that you can't self-deprecate yourself in it.
Self-incriminate, right? You can be, the word you use really just means talk down about yourself. You can do that all you want, but you don't have to incriminate yourself. Okay, and that's the key. Nobody can force you to testify against yourself. So if you do something illegal, you ain't got to tell nobody. All right? But the Fifth Amendment also provides other rights in terms of how your trial is going to happen. The fact that you cannot have your, like you get due process, okay? Those sorts of concepts that come with basic civil rights, okay? Now, we need to understand, one, your protections are the Constitution. The Constitution is always going to be protection because the Constitution is the basic law of the land. Right? That's the definition of the Constitution, law of the land. And the Constitution also specifically states that there are a couple of things that are not to be violated. Okay, ex post facto laws are one of them. This is similar to what we talked about with the grandfather clause. Similar, although not the same. Okay, so ex post facto law simply means that the government cannot charge you with a crime for something that you did a week ago simply because they passed a law yesterday that said it's now illegal. Alright, this is the argument that Hillary Clinton used in saying that she never sent classified information. Right? Because she said when she sent it, it wasn't classified. Then they classified it, so she didn't actually mishandle classified information. When she mishandled it, it wasn't classified at all. Alright? Basic understanding. Bill of Rights, also. The Bill of Rights you should recognize. Over the course of time, we've had various pieces of legislation that have been passed. Most of our pieces of legislation that have been passed actually relate to civil rights. So Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, anti-discriminatory acts, you can count Title IX in that. Alright? Court decisions are sources of civil rights and civil liberties, and court decisions are actually both. Okay, so you have some court cases that extend civil rights. Okay, Brown versus Board of Education, for instance. You have others that extend civil liberties, Texas versus Johnson and flag burning, we've already talked about, as well as Roe v. Wade, right? State constitutions, they also provide civil rights and civil liberties, right? Now, here's one of the keys and sort of the differences, all right? So when we look at civil liberties, do you have true freedom of religion? Yes? So religiously, you can do whatever you want. So where I come from in North Carolina, and this is actually not a joke, okay? Up in the mountains in North Carolina, there's actually a religion, right, where people dance around with venomous snakes, right? And if you got enough faith in God, these snakes don't bite you. That's real. Can you practice a religion that way? Yeah, why not? If you're dumb enough to handle a poisonous snake and it bites you and you die, oh well. Hope God greets you as a friend. Alright? But you have that freedom of religion, right? You can practice your religion that way. Okay? So do we have absolute freedom of religion? The answer is still no. Okay? The answer is still no. Right? Anybody know what a Rastafarian is? It's a real religion. Okay? It actually is. It is a religion. Okay? Some Rastafarians smoke marijuana. Okay? Just like some Native American religions, they use peyote, right, which is a hallucinogen. Okay? These are illegal substances according to the national government. Can you ingest them as a part of a religious ceremony? Not without breaking the law. Okay? Just because your religion says that you should do something doesn't mean that it supersedes law that already exists. Okay? A probably easier example for this is how many of us have ever seen like a TV show like Sister Wives or Big Love or anything like that. Right? You know polygamy is illegal. You cannot have multiple wives or multiple husbands for that matter. Okay? I don't care that your religion says marry 6 people. Can't do it. Okay? Law says you can't. Now, we understand then that we do not have absolute liberties. Where do we draw the line?
When it interferes with another law.
Glad you can read. When it interferes with the rights of others, really. Okay, but obviously what we just talked about is interfering with another law. So that's one, interference with another law, but interference with the rights of others, right? That's the other one. Okay, and again, easy example for that is think about freedom of speech. Right? Can you say whatever you want? No, you do not have absolute freedom of speech. Right? If I walked up behind Christian right now and whispered in his ear, then I'm going to murder him. Right? That I can get his address, right, through the little computer system, because I'm the teacher, I'm going to come to his house, and I'm going to slit his throat. Can I tell him that? Is that a crime? Yeah, if he believes that I'm serious, then yes, that's a crime. Okay? I do not have the right to threaten him like that. Okay? Now, that being said, how many of us have ever said they're going to kill somebody? Right? I'm going to tell you right now, like when I was your age, I sat on a football field all the time, and I just looked at people across my mouth. I'm murder you, man. Doesn't mean I was actually going to go to their house and kill them. Okay? That sort of freedom of speech then is protected. Okay? Because there's no expectation that I'm actually going to infringe upon their rights. But I mean, if I creepily walked up behind a Christian and told him that, he has every right to go and be like, this baker's going to kill me, man. You need to go, I got to get out of his class. Okay? And there I would have broken the law. Alright? So, with all of this, then we see that there has to be some sort of balancing act, right? Because I want to be able to say whatever I want. Right? And if I need to psych myself up in a football game to say that I'm going to go murder that running back over there, right? That's not really a violation of the law. But if I say I'm going to go murder Christian in his sleep, that's wrong. So we have to be able to balance these two things. Okay? And that ultimately becomes the role of the court. Did you record me saying I'm going to kill you?
What?
Is that why your
No,
phone's
show
up?
me the picture.
Oh, okay. All right, so this idea here, this balancing test, that ultimately becomes the responsibility of the courts. All right? Ultimately the responsibility of the courts. That's where, like, Texas v. Johnson comes in. Right? Did your freedom of expression, your freedom of speech in burning the flag, was it detrimental to the rights of somebody else? Okay? The court has to balance that. All right? Now, who gets civil rights and civil liberties? Everybody?
U.S. citizen.
Just U.S. citizens? So if you come to this country legally and you have a green card, not a citizen, you're a what's considered a legal alien, right? Do you get freedom of speech?
No problem.
Probably.
Yeah.
Do you? Let me ask you this way though: do you think they should
Yes.
have freedom of speech?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. What if you come here illegally? You cross the border illegally. Should you have freedom of speech?
Yes.
Yes? Okay? What if you are deemed by the state to be a Muslim terrorist? You were picked up in Pakistan and thrown in Guantanamo Bay's little maximum security prison. Should you have freedom of speech then?
Yes.
Yes?
Trying to do it right now.
So, this, and I use the last example, guys, because this is actually something that has come up over the last 15 years, really, since we've had the war on terror. Okay? For the longest time, we have believed that our basic constitution applies to everyone. You now have people that are saying that enemy combatants, they don't get the same rights and liberties as everybody else. And there are actually historical precedents for that. Okay? Even for actual U.S. citizens. Think back to the Civil War. Okay? If you were a Union soldier and you were captured by the Confederate Army, okay, did they throw you in a jail? Yes. Right? You're a prisoner of war now. You got captured. Okay? Our Constitution says you can't be held indefinitely. Right? That's a violation of your basic civil rights. They actually have to charge you with a crime and put you on trial. And that's called habeas corpus. Did that happen in the Civil War? Or in the Civil War, did they just imprison you for the length of the war? You get imprisoned for the length of the war. We actually have a precedent that says habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of war. Are we at war right now? Technically, yes. Technically, we're at war with terror. So, can we suspend habeas corpus for suspected terrorists? Maybe. Okay? And this is an issue that's not easily resolved. Alright? And there are some exceptions. We consider voting a civil right. Okay? Obviously, non-citizens can't vote. Okay? So there are some differences. Alright? We talked about this with federalism already. Okay? The Bill of Rights, okay, is originally a protection against the national government. It was our compromise between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, right? The Anti-Federalists demand a Bill of Rights to make sure the national government doesn't overstep its boundaries. Alright? The original belief here is that the Bill of Rights apply only to the national government and that the people can defend themselves against the state government. That's gone away. Okay? And what we have is the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is, for all intents and purposes, it's an equal protection amendment, right? Or an equal rights amendment. We tried to pass an actual equal rights amendment in like the 70s. It failed. In reality, for 150 years now, the 14th Amendment has been used as an equal rights amendment. And it provides you equal protection under the law. It's actually the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. And what the due process clause of the 14th Amendment does is it begins to apply the Bill of Rights to the states as well. So state governments cannot interfere with your basic rights, right? Now, there'd be two ways to do this. Okay, the first here is total incorporation, and that would just be to automatically apply every Bill of Right to the states, guaranteed, we're done. And we don't do it that way. And we don't do it that way for what I told you last week, right? We talked about how cases are actually tried, right? How the Supreme Court hears things, how we challenge law. There are specific provisions that are challenged. And so what we end up with here is what's called selective incorporation. Selective incorporation means that on a case-by-case basis, we're going to cherry pick and we're going to start applying the Bill of Rights to the states on that individual case-by-case basis. There are actually current, like, Bill of Rights amendments that have never been applied to the states. Anybody want to guess which one?
It's part of the fifth, right? No, wait. It's like the part of the eighth that's like the bail, right? The excessive bail and fine.
No. Excessive bail, cruel and unusual punishment, states can't do that too. Anybody know what the Third Amendment is? What? Quartering of troops. Has that been applied to the state yet? No. The state doesn't have its own army. Right? In reality, that one probably never will be applied to the state. Right? But the rest of them, a state government cannot infringe upon your freedom of speech or your freedom of petition, etc., etc. All right? We'll talk about a wide variety of cases throughout the semester. You're actually going to get an assignment tomorrow that we'll go over where you're going to create a PowerPoint about a handful of court cases. All right? But we'll talk about a few. So, Gitlow v. New York, and this will be on your list. This is one you're generally required to know, is a freedom of speech. I guess you can also count it as a freedom of press issue. Gitlow is a communist in the 1920s. He's convicted of criminal anarchy. He claims, right, that his freedom of speech is violated by the state. And the Supreme Court says that his conviction is good. Okay? And so they use what will be called the clear and present danger test to his speech. All right. But in the Supreme Court making their decision, they also say that states can't deny freedom of speech, freedom of press, and they're going to use the 14th Amendment's due process clause to selectively incorporate those two provisions, just those two, into the states, right? So now, how can you tell me that the states can't prevent him from saying what he wants and publishing what he wants, yet we're going to throw him in jail for saying what he wants and publishing what he wants? Do we understand how there's an issue there? And again, this goes back to the balancing act that I told you that the courts have to deal with. And the basic balancing act is, are you allowed to say whatever you want? No. Okay? And so the argument is that what Gitlow is doing is actually considered criminal anarchy. He is actually advocating for the overthrow of the government. Therefore, his speech is no longer protected. Right? Okay? Same sort of concept that if you go get on your little Twitter account tonight and you be like, I'm going to go kill Donald Trump, you going to jail. Guaranteed. Bet. Don't do it. Because here's the thing, dude. I promise you, and that type of threat is taken seriously. You will be detained. I'm not saying you're going to go to jail for the next 20 years, right? But what I'm saying is you're going to end up being detained. The Secret Service is going to come down and investigate. They're going to figure out whether or not that was an actual, legitimate, feasible threat. Okay? But you will spend the next probably 2 weeks just going through an absolute miserable hell. Of course, you would think being detained by the Secret Service would be quote unquote live.
Being detained by the Secret Service, I would put that on my resume.
And would that be your application for unemployment because you can't find a job? Here's the thing. I mean, if they really wanted to, they could still charge you with like making threats. Now, the truth of the matter is, I honestly don't believe. What are you, Will? 17 now?
No,
16. I really don't think that they would actually like imprison a 16-year-old kid, and I use that term just from the legal sense, for doing something on Twitter. Because let's be honest, y'all do stuff with your social media accounts all the time that is borderline criminal. But at the same time, if it's really deemed detrimental to the welfare of the state, and obviously assassinating the president would be, that's a criminal activity. And your freedom of speech doesn't protect that level of criminality. Okay? So, these are all provisions in the Bill of Rights, in our first 10 amendments, that have been selectively incorporated over the course of time. Right? Assembly, petition, religion, search and seizure, self-incrimination, double jeopardy, which is another 6th Amendment or 5th Amendment issue, right? Right to counsel, bring witnesses, confront witnesses, protections against cruel and unusual punishment. All right? These are all things that the states can no longer violate, right? And just because I enjoy telling this story, I'm going to tell you a real fun story about cruel and unusual punishment. Right? First of all, anybody in here think that the death penalty counts as cruel and unusual punishment? There are some people that believe that. And there are actually a lot of people that believe that that is the very definition of cruel and unusual punishment. Okay? I can never remember the guy's name, and I have a hard time finding it because it's a really old story, like a really old instance. Okay? But there was a guy who was going to be executed. He was going to be put to death in Virginia many years ago, many decades ago, actually. Okay, back when the means of execution was still hanging. And this guy had to have had some sort of means, some sort of wealth. And he figured out a way to basically eat himself into obesity while in prison. And then they realized that they couldn't execute him, because if they had hung him, the sheer weight of his body would have caused his head to pop off from the rope. And his lawyers successfully argued that that is cruel and unusual punishment. not the execution itself, but rather the means of execution. Right? Same reason why you can't draw and quarter somebody as a means of execution. And if you don't know what drawing and quartering is, it's where like they tie a rope to both your wrists and both your ankles.
So like what they did in Braveheart?
Yeah, pretty much. What?
So, he got off scot-free, or they just shoot him at dawn?
No, I'm pretty sure he spent the remainder of his life in prison.
Okay.
I mean, it's not like, sorry, we can't execute you, you're gonna go home now.
Yeah, it's just,
Right now it just turns into a life sentence instead of an executable offense. Okay, the Palco test, Palco v. Connecticut. Okay, this is one of our basic tests here to figure out it's what the state of the courts call essential liberty, right? So if the state denies you that individual right, okay, did you lose your essential liberty, right? Would your freedom no longer exist in its basic provisions? That's not accurate anymore. This is out of date. The Second Amendment does now apply to the states based on a case in Chicago about 4 years ago. Okay, Chicago was trying to, rightfully so, Chicago was trying to like get rid of handguns. Because if you know anything about Chicago, like over Labor Day weekend, somebody gets shot like every 9 minutes in Chicago. And which is wildly problematic, but sadly accurate. Still, the state of Illinois cannot deny you your Second Amendment rights. Obviously, the Third Amendment, I just told you, really never going to be applied. The 10th Amendment is essentially a catch-all that says anything not given to the states, or not given to the national government belongs to the states, not really incorporatable. The 7th is the 7th, trial by jury in a civil case, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I thought you'd get that in a state case. Must be wrong. Okay. 9th Amendment, and this is important to understand, this is because, so the 9th and 10th are sort of catch-all amendments, right? We go through 1 through 8, and 1 through 8 list very sort of specific things. Okay, 9 and 10 are a lot more broad. Okay, so 9 says that you basically have rights, you have individual freedoms, liberties, rights that are not listed in 1 through 8. Okay, the right to privacy is the most frequently used, right? And the right to privacy comes from Griswold v. Connecticut, but it's the same implied or informal amendment to the Constitution that we use for Roe v. Wade, right? Roe v. Wade, regardless of what you actually believe about abortion personally, from a legal standpoint, it is a privacy issue, okay? The legal argument in that case is, does an individual woman have a right to privacy in terms of her voluntary medical care? Okay? That's how that decision gets made. Okay? Obviously, you have a right to travel, right? Freedom of movement. You have a right to political association. Okay? And political association actually affords you the opportunity, sadly, to discriminate from time to time there. Okay, we're going to stop right there. So that's a bunch of background information.